The last thing is importing and inheritance. Importing and inheritance are kind of advanced topics if you're new to development, but let me explain them with an analogy. Let's say that your friend spends an entire summer creating a really cool shed. They're hammering away at the room, they're installing the floor, they're putting in the windows, and at the end of the summer, you really like the shed that they built, but you maybe wish that it had carpet instead of hardwood. Well, if this was code, you could essentially copy-paste your friend's code and then make the changes that you want to. Now, this might sound like plagiarism, but in development, it's the highest form of a compliment because it means the person that is using your code trusts your code and you saved them a ton of time. You can take someone's code that they spent a year working on, include a few lines of code, and then build on top of what they built on. This is basically what importing and inheritance is. It's also very powerful. Once you understand how variables work, how to write functions, when to use conditionals, and the basics of importing and inheritance, you could create basically any smart contract you want to. If you're curious, I cover all of these in depth with a step-by-step process in the first 4 weeks of my upcoming Web3 bootcamp, which means you basically master Solidity in under a month. But more about that later. Next up, after you master Solidity, which is the development language that's used to create smart contracts on the blockchain, the next step would be to create a user interface for your smart contract. The user interface usually takes the form of a website that someone can visit, and the programming language to create this user interface is very different from Solidity, although it does use very similar concepts. The move from backend, like a blockchain, to frontend, like a web page, is very easy if you understand the core principles. React is a front-end framework that uses something called JSX expressions, JavaScript code, HTML code, and CSS code to create basically any web page that you can imagine. After I learned Solidity, I would then learn React. Now, within React, a subcomponent that you can use is something called ethers. Ethers is a package that allows you to use tools, functions, and components that someone else already created, which give you the ability to write code that interacts with the blockchain. If you were to write it yourself, it would be hundreds of lines of code just to read and write to the blockchain. But the package ethers lets you do things like call functions, read variables on the blockchain, or send ether with just a few lines of code. It's very useful, and you can learn how to use it within a few days. Now, another thing that's really useful with React is something called routing. And routing is just a fancy word that describes the ability to create multiple pages. On its own, React only creates one single home page that you can use. With routing, you can add multiple pages to your dApp, like /info or /buy or /trade, to make your dApp exponentially more useful. It's not super intuitive, but once you understand it, it's very easy to set up. The next two things that would be really helpful is HTML and CSS. Now, HTML is a very basic language that almost all the web pages are created with. Back in the year 2000, pages were created with just HTML, and it hasn't really changed too much since then. But if you don't have any experience with HTML, I would definitely get some, as it'll really help your journey to become a blockchain dev in the long term. And finally, CSS is the language that we use to style and design our HTML. It is ever evolving, and honestly, you could create an entire career out of just mastering CSS itself and designing pages, posts, plugins, buttons, and entire front ends for other people. Designing itself is a skill, and CSS is turning that design into code so that it can be displayed fast and easily on anyone's computer or device. Overall, learning how to effectively use React to create beautiful landing web pages and combining that front-end user experience with the power of decentralized smart contracts, that's the essence of what Web3 is. It's not something you can learn and master overnight, but it can definitely be done within a few months. Now, of course, what I just went through is a huge curriculum, and I wouldn't start by learning for 2 months and then building. I would build from the beginning and learn as I build. I would learn during the building process. I would create a simple smart contract, then maybe move on to a token, and then an NFT, and slowly move to more complex dApps. As time goes on, I would create a few big, interesting dApps and show them on a website that would basically be my own portfolio to show other people what I've created. If you want to go through my very own Web3 Portfolio Builder Bootcamp, the time is ticking to join the current cohort. In the next 12 weeks, you will master Solidity, learn how to create user interfaces with React, and create a few dApps of your own. Essentially, building your very own portfolio to show off to become a highly paid developer. The proof will be in the pudding. You'll be able to show off what you know, or if you want, you can just build your own dApp from an idea that you have. I guarantee it's much easier than you think it is. If you're ready to join, you can join with the link below before the timer ends, and you'll get access to my initial launch bonus.